Just a heads up, I don't curse, so I'll always replace the curse word with something else.
Kamino's Word by Tunafishprincess. Read by Ella Flowerdeath. Chapter 3. Summary. Izuku wakes up. When Captain Kamino throws his mighty shield, all those who chose to oppose his shield must yield. If he leads to a fight and a duel is due, then the red and the black and the green will come on through. When Captain Kamino threw his mighty shield, Island International Chore, Captain Kamino, Songs of Revolution, a compilation of 21st century music, Tsubaki Records, 2001. He wasn't sure when he had lost consciousness, or how long he had been out. All he knew was that he was waking up now, mind processing the minute things around him. A constant rhythmic beat kept him from drifting back to a dreamless sleep. His brows twitched, soon followed by his fingers, different parts of him starting to wake up. He blinked hazily, trying to comprehend the scene around him. His eyes rested on a small monitor to his left, the little lines keeping pace with his rising heartbeat. A pole holding two fluid bags set to the side, the tubing leading down to his right finger. His fingers twitched. Familiar metal dinged under his touch. His shield lay against his chest, the light material covering his torso. It did little to elevate his discomfort. Why was he in hospital? What happened to him? Oh crap, he's waking up, a voice whispered. Now that definitely woke him up. Despite how heavy his body felt, he heaved upwards, sitting awkwardly as the numbness in his limbs lingered on. The room was small and cramped, barely fitting the 3 people occupying it. Adrenaline took over as he instinctively started to analyze the situation, noting details to try to understand his current predicament. Beeping? It was coming from the heart monitor. Someone was trying to keep him alive. For what purpose, though? An unstable flooring shook off the rest of the haze. An earthquake? No, something else. Car? Not the hospital, then. His gaze flickered around, absorbing his surroundings in more detail. Ambulance, his mind provided, or at least something that looks like one. Where were they going? Too many questions crowded his mind. Super serum or not, he couldn't help the rising panic inside his chest. He bit down his inner cheek, trying to stabilize himself with the pain. The 2 men were dressed in dark clothing that reminded Izuku all too much of the emo minions of his uncle's old comics, with black face masks and gloves to match. The hair on his neck stood up as one of the men stalked over. Someone go call the boss, hurry, the other male said, waving his arms as if to placate the boy. "Hey there, kiddo." Izuku's breath hitched, hands quickly traveling to his face, his mask. They knew his identity. He pulled his shield closer to him, putting a wall of protection between him and them. He tried to control his breathing, but there were too many things coming at him at once. The smell of antiseptic, the sight of various medical equipment around him, potential weapons, the feel of soft fabric against his chest, unfit for fighting, and he was overanalyzing again. The sensations didn't drown out the rest of his mind, however. In fact, it seemed to enhance its processing. Memories flashed through his thoughts. The bomb, the mission. A cold shiver traveled up his spine as he recalled his last moments. The machine's beeping intensified as his heart started to race. He quickly detached the virus, fight or flight instincts kicking in. The strangers didn't seem to notice his discomfort, one fumbling around with his phone, while the earlier man waved one of his hands, the other reaching for something behind his back. Izuku's breathing hitched. He pulled the IV port out of his right hand, ignoring the spike of pain. "Whoa now, everything's going to be alright. Now just sit there and..." On any normal, ordinary day, he would have let the man explain. After all, he was a reasonable person. But after having been knocked around, forced to drive an airplane into the Arctic, and believing he was very well and truly about to die at the young age of 15, well, suffice to say, the man's words did nothing to stop Izuku's incoming shield. The force of the throw wouldn't be enough to take the man down, not in his condition, so Izuku rolled out of the bed and onto his feet. Unsteady as he might be, his father's training was merciless for a reason. Grabbing a hold of the IV pole, he swung hard, knocking both men into the door. The car lurched, likely responding to Izuku's actions. Before the driver could come to a stop, however, Izuku picked up his shield once more. Blood pumped through his veins, muscles straining as he was thrown forward by the braking vehicle. Curling up, he took the impact onto his shield. Glass broke as the doors burst open. He jumped to his freedom. Sunlight assaulted his vision. He inwardly reprimanded himself for such a stupid move. Should have jumped after the car stopped, he thought. Not before. He always did jump into things before thinking. Wow, maybe his uncle was right about him being a magnet for danger. Honestly, it was probably a family trait, now that he thought about it. Oh shoot, he was overthinking things again. He went as the asphalt approached, bracing for impact. The screech was worse than nails on a chalkboard. He tried to minimize the amount of force on his body as much as possible, but even while the shield cut most of the damage, he still got mild throat rash and what felt like a dislocated shoulder. He grit his teeth to keep from yelling. His left arm ached as he skidded down the line, past honking cars and screaming pedestrians. The second he came to a stop, he was back on his feet again, ignoring the burning sensation in his side and shoulder as he scanned the area for some sort of clue as to his location. He squinted. He wasn't used to this much natural light. Everyone around him appeared blurry and bright. Japanese voices clued him in on the country, much to his relief, though the accents were slightly off. Was he on one of the islands? They weren't big, like Osaka Ben, or the melodic harsh tones of a Kansai Ben, or any other regional accent he had come across. In fact, if Izuku were to be honest, it was like a conglomeration of multiple accents pressed into one. He blinked. He was probably just imagining it. His gaze traveled to the street signs as his vision began to clear, followed by the metro ones. Close to Tokyo then. Did the Japanese government still have that warrant of his arrest? He bit the inner part of his cheek. Probably, he thought morosely. The figure of his father worked so hard to build up came with a reputation after all. He focused his attention back to the present. Somehow, he had survived the plane crash and being transported back here. Why in an ambulance, though? So many questions and not enough answers. There he is, one of the men from earlier yelled. Izuku tensed. The pain in his arm intensified. Shoot. He should fix that. Grabbing his dislocated arm, he jerked it back into the socket with a pained grunt. His father would probably admonish him for such a move, but it wasn't as if he had time to go to a hospital and get a doctor to do it. He flexed the limb, the pain lessening as more blood pumped through it. His two kidnappers seemed less than pleased at his escape. But at least they weren't shooting at him yet, so that was a plus. Hands up, they tried to approach. Just come quietly and no one has to get hurt. Izuku zeroed in on the last part. The hair on the back of his neck stood up as his body shifted, lowering to the ground. The man must have thought he was giving up, coming closer, directly into his range. Big mistake on their part. Calculating the distance, he spun, aiming his shield for the first man's chest. The kidnapper seemed to expect it this time, dropping low, only to meet Izuku's awaiting low kick. In spite of the growing sounds of the crowd, Izuku could hear the crack of the man's jaw against the ball of his foot. Not waiting to lose momentum, he hooked his arm around the man's neck, slamming him down so hard his head bounced against the pavement. Police sirens split through the area, drowning out the crowds. Izuku froze. Not good. He had brought too much attention to himself. It was in this hesitance he didn't see the other man come up from behind. Freaking hell, kid. Crap, crap, crap. Tanaka's down. He tightened his hold on Izuku's neck. Where the hell is Karaga with the van? Boss is gonna kill us if we don't get you back. Stop squirming. I'll stop squirming when you stop trying to kidnap me. Izuku retorted, smashing the palm of his hand into the man's covered nose. A sharp snap and a rush of curses drew a victorious smirk from the dean. He didn't have long to savor it, however. The voice carried through the area, drawing both assailant and victim's attention. "This is the Kamino Police Department. Put your hands up." Seeing the opportunity for what it was, Izuku called back, "Help! I'm being kidnapped." "You little brat," the man growled, not helping his case whatsoever. The crowds of people had turned into an active audience, camera phones flashing from every direction. Izuku tried to control his breathing, but it was kind of hard with the kidnapper's arm around his neck. But Izuku had been in worse situation. Gathering all the energy in his body, he crouched and jerked sideways, pulling the man off of his feet and onto Izuku's back. Training took hold as he flipped forward, taking the man with him. The short time in the air was all Izuku needed to dislodge the man's forearm from his throat. Twisting the arm to his chest, he turned the flip into slam at the last moment, both adult and teen thrown apart by the force of it. Thankfully, he landed back on his feet, adrenaline keeping him from falling where he stood. His bones cracked, muscles burning with strain. He would normally be ready to go for another fight or two, but something held him back. He looked down at his hands. Surprise flashed over his features. His wrists were slimmer than he remembered, as were the rest of his arms. He didn't look further. The message was clear. A ball of anxiety formed in the pit of his stomach, growing with every passing second. Exactly how long was he out for? The sounds of the people grew louder. He eyed the police vehicles waringly. The designs were different than he remembered. They had multiplied since he first noticed them, now coming down both sides of the road. To his astonishment, the van he was transported in was seized by several of the officers, one even taking the driver into a nearby cruiser. Did that mean the kidnappers weren't connected to them? Not government related? An anti-quirk organization, perhaps? Getting rid of Phantom Skull probably put him on more than one hit list, he realized. His fingers twitched, anxious to find his shield. A wave of relief flooded through him when he discovered that it was lodged into one of the nearby cars. The driver was less than enthused, his cheeks turning purple. It must be a trick of the light. Izuku mumbled a quick apology, his own face beat red as he yanked the shield out. "I repeat, put your hands in the air. This is the Kamino Police Department." "Wait, I mean Kamino?" he blurted out, the words finally processing. Izuku nearly dropped his shield. Home. He was back in his hometown. Water gathered in his eyes. He eyed the buildings. Though he didn't recognize any of the storefronts, there was familiarity in the structures. The flavor of his home, a sight for his tired eyes. How long has it been since he'd been back home? More tears developed. Too long. A small bubble of hope formed in his chest as he continued to survey the scene. Maybe his father, or his uncle were around somewhere. But it's not like he has a phone or computer right now. Heck, he doesn't even have shoes on, now that he thought about it. The hospital gown and thin pants were already torn and dirtied by his escape. This is your last warning. Put your hands in the air and back away from the weapon. Oh, right. His gaze traveled back to the police. They weren't doing anything to stop him. In fact, now that he thought about it, he rubbed his eyes, blinking at the sight. He'd been so distracted by the fight that he hadn't actually perceived the people around him in much detail. Now, however, was a different story. He openly gasped. There were quirk users in police uniform. Quirk users, several actually, and the crowds had even more. His eyes floated over the group in awe at the amount of powers around him. Mutant quirks, emitter quirks, transformation quirks. Gosh, he wanted to study each and every one of them. His hands ached for a pencil or pen or something to note down all the interesting powers before his eyes. He had never seen so many people in one place outside of the quirk rights rallies. And they were here, out in the open, on the street of Japan. His head began to spin. He grasped his hair, trying to find some semblance of sanity. Was this really his Kamino? Sweat trickled down his temple. The confusion of reality and the image in front of him had sent Izuku's already stressed mind into a frenzy. The serum didn't help matters either. It hadn't just enhanced his physical abilities, it also gave the jumpy teen an overload of anxiety issues to go with it. Downside of science, he supposed. There was always a cost. His eyes glazed over, no longer paying attention to the world around him. A giddy lightheadedness squirmed in his head, filling him with silent giggles. This is all just some bizarre dream, he rationalized. I'm probably dying of apathemia right now. It had to be. He almost didn't notice the policeman approaching, his tail flicking back and forth behind in what Izuku assumed to be fake friendliness. For a dream, he sure got a lot of details included. Even the fur of the police's face was smooth and defined. Easy, kid. You don't want any trouble. How about you come down with us to the station? Izuku's gaze sharpened. Imaginary or not, going to any police station spelled trouble. I think I stay here. Thank you very much, he answered politely, at least until he woke up from his dream. The feline policeman didn't appear amenable to his proposal sadly. You said you were kidnapped? I'm not sure what's going on, but you look hurt. How about we at least get you some bandages? I've got a few in my car, if you'll just follow me. No, thank you. I'll stay right here, Izuku stated, holding firm. He had seen enough quirk users spirited away by the authorities, never to return from the prisons they threw them into. No, Izuku would not stay right here until he awoke. The cop's pupils turned to slits. Listen, we can do this the easy way or the hard way. His gaze lowered to Izuku's shield. Now come on. Put down the shield. Izuku adjusted the straps on his shield as he kept eye contact with the man. You seem very kind, Officer Nekomata, he supplied. Officer Nekomata, he said brightly, taking a moment to enjoy the pun before giving a short but respectful bow. While I appreciate your offer, I'm afraid I will have to decline. I was afraid you would say that. He sighed, hand reaching for his belt. Izuku was faster. Using as little force as possible, he flung his shield directly into the man's solar plexus. The weapon returned to his hands, just as the officer collapsed, groaning in pain. As expected, the police did not take very kindly to his display of disobedience. Surround him, one yelled. No, stop. I have this under control, Officer Nekomata said, to no avail. Izuku didn't give them the chance. Acting fast, he took down 4 more before the fatigue began to catch up with his body. Frustration furrowed his brow. He had grown weaker since he was last awake, as he regulated his breathing. He casually leaned against his shield for support. His muscles ached, pain lancing up and down his form at the strain he placed on them. At least the officers learned their lesson. They talked amongst themselves, huddled together in small groups to plan their next course of action. Izuku strained to hear them. All he could get out was Gorkla, Vigilante, and Public Safety Commission, which made absolutely zero sense to the tired teen. For a dream, this place was pretty vivid and detailed. He almost didn't notice the shadow that flickered across the ground. Almost. The increase in temperature definitely altered him. That something was off though. His body tensed. He eased the shield back into his arm. The crowds of onlookers fell silent. I'll take it from here, officer, a deep voice announced from above. But this is our jurisdiction, one of the police officers argued through the megaphone. He seemed to want to continue based on his look of frustration, but one of his co-workers waved him off, shaking his head, as if it were fool's errand. The air shifted. Where once very whispers floated through the area were now excited cheers. The mood of the people yo-yoing in a way that made Izuku nearly jerk back. Phones snapped pictures like crazy, the flashing lights irritating his eyes. Several in the group called something about the lines of "endanger." They didn't make him relieved in the slightest. If anything, his nerves went haywire. Izuku gulped, finally facing the newcomer. Bad idea. The man on fire seemed less than pleased with him. There was a severity in his features, the flames enhancing the appearance into something quite sinister. It was an amazing quirk, Izuku thought. Amazing and terrifying. The way he glared down at the teen left him far more out of sorts than he had been minutes before. "I suggest you put down your toy, child," the flaming male shouted over the sound of the crowds, his voice strange theatric, as if he were putting on a show for them. "Least you want to feel my flames." Izuku froze. For a dream, the heat from the flames felt pretty darn realistic. They licked at his face, drying off the sweat he'd accumulated. He wasn't the only one feeling it either. He noted the way people in the vicinity were taking off their jackets and rolling up their sleeves, how they remained unperturbed to the flying fireball. Izuku could not begin to fathom. It must be due to the dream. Normally, people would run away at the sight, quirk users or not. "Don't make me repeat myself," the fiery man stated, voice clipped. "Someone come get this kid. I have better places to be." "I apologize, but I'm not moving from this spot until I wake up," Izuku announced. That seemed to get the man's attention. His brows drew together, eyes squinting down in a way that didn't so much as strike fear in Izuku so much as create annoyance. It was the look his father gave him when he brought up pop culture. For a man who appeared to know everything, Hisashi Midoriya was surprisingly dense about what interested the teen. It was the reason why he connected so much better with his uncle. His heart banged at the thought of his family. He didn't let his emotion get the better of him just yet, though. "I see," the man said, the words strolling off his tongue in a distasteful manner. "You think this is a dream?" "Of course it is," Izuku started, hands moving on their own as he spoke. "You're a flaming man right in the middle of a busy street. Not only are you a dangerous fire hazard, no offense, you have a great quirk, and I would love to study it, but you're also putting hundreds of people in danger by using your powers directly on top of us. Fire burns people outside of you, I guess. I'm guessing you have some sort of pyrokinesis to achieve both protection from the flames and that level of height from the ground. How much firepower do you need to put out to emulate flying? I'm guessing a lot. That's pretty dangerous, even out in the open. What if we were in an enclosed place? You would suck up all the oxygen and kill everyone, you included. And on that note, none of these people can be real either. I mean, real life police are not nearly so inept as to let a man with a firework go around a city like this one. If this were real, you wouldn't be flying around so much as bound and gagged for acts of quirk terrorism. And, oh wow, I'm rambling, aren't I?" He laughed sheepishly. The man's features seemed to darken with every word he said. "Is that it? Is that all you have to say?" Izuku pressed his index over his lip, thumb coming underneath his chin as he thought of what else to say to the dream-man. He could comment on his ridiculous costume, obviously a conglomeration of superhero costumes Izuku liked to read. Flashy, over the top, dramatic. Okay, he loved it. The regalia brought a warm smile to his lips. He wished his uncle were here to see this. It was quite Silver Age in his opinion.
I think that's it, Izuku stated, nodding as he spoke. Yep, that's certainly it. What in the world are you doing? He narrowly dodged the man's punch, somersaulting to his feet so he could put distance between them. The street seemed to sizzle beneath the man's impact, asphalt bubbling in a way that made Izuku gulp. He could not risk getting hit with that. You said this was a gym, yes? A sliver of teeth appeared, giving the man a vicious smile. Well, I'm about to make it your worst nightmare. The licks of flame against his skin set him on edge. From the scent of burned hair to the throbbing pain in his side, doubt began to spread across his mind as the temperature continued to rise. What if... No, it couldn't be. His brows drew together, breathing growing rapid, shallowing as panic took hold, more questions rising to the surface of his thoughts. Why hadn't he woke up yet? Why was this world so detailed and intricate? Aren't dreams supposed to end after a certain period? There was only one plausible answer. This wasn't a dream at all. This is real, Izuku whispered, to no one but himself. He could feel his throat tightening, heart pounding so hard he could hear it. But how did he get here? What happened to him after he hit the ice? These thoughts and more circled through his mind, his dread sinking into his flesh and grasping his heart in a vice-like grip. Izuku sucked in a breath, too terrified to speak. He needed to end this, fast. Super serum or not, he was flammable. He wouldn't be able to grapple the man lest he want first-degree burns. Not that he really could with the sorry state his body was in right now. But his mind supplied, cutting through the panic. Your shield isn't. Time wasn't on his side. The fiery man practically exploded from his landing site, hurtling towards the teen at breakneck speed. He wouldn't be able to dodge this. Izuku gritted his teeth. Planting his feet into the ground, he squared his shoulders, positioning his shield to protect his body. The impact nearly toppled him over. The vibranium sank so loudly, Izuku thought his ears might pop, feeling the vibrations in his bones. His opponent seemed to feel it too, if his bleeding hand was any indication. There was an openly stunned look on the other's face, as if he couldn't believe his attack hadn't gone through. Izuku felt a bank of sympathy. Vibranium was the strongest metal in existence. Not even all of his father's enhancing type quirks could break the material. If it wasn't broken, it was at the very least sprained. I'm sorry, Izuku stated, rubbing the back of his neck. About the hand, that is. You might want to get that checked out. That seemed to infuriate the man even more. Who the hell are you? Oh, that was a very loaded question. According to some, he was a part of a terrorist organization hell-bent on destroying Japanese society. To others, he was a protector, a symbol handcrafted by his father to promote quirk user equality. But to Izuku, I'm just a kid from Kamino, he supplied sheepishly. I suggest you stand down, sir. Is that a threat? He snarled. The stunned look faded, replaced with a serious glare. It struck Izuku that he had lost his element of surprise now. No, sir, he answered, readying his body for another go. A warning. The fire grew in intensity. Izuku had to step back a few meters, the ground growing too hot for his feet to handle. This battle couldn't go on forever. Izuku could only block for so long before his body gave out. He cast his thoughts toward the people around them. Concern crossed his features. They could be really hurt here. The other man probably knew that too, going by his sideways glance toward them. He watched as the male squared his features, no longer as emotive as earlier. He wasn't going to pull back this time, Izuku realized fearfully. The next punch would end this. Which meant Izuku needed to act fast. He quickly analyzed the man for any open weaknesses he could exploit. It wasn't easy. He was fast and big, which gave Izuku little room to fight with. But big doesn't necessarily mean better, he thought. The taller man's back and shoulders worked as potential blind spots. The fire around his face and body could also pose to give him coverage too, which left Izuku with an insanely dumb plan that required a good deal of misdirection, a dose of flexibility, and a heavy helping of luck to win this. A feverish shot of determination overtook Izuku's features. He had gone into fights with worse odds. Give up now and no harm will come to you, the man stated, flexing his good hand. You can't keep this up forever. Are you kidding? Izuku bluffed, hoping his voice didn't betray his real emotions. The teenager shifted his gait, readying for what could either be his biggest success or his greatest failure. Also death. That was a possibility too, he reasoned. I could do this all day. One chance. He struggled to keep his legs from shaking. He wasn't sure whether it was due to exhaustion or fear or both. The flames spread across the area. The ground popped and hissed, the air taking on a mirage-like quality he only saw in the dog days of summer. The man's feet shifted. Izuku's eyes narrowed. As he lifted for takeoff, the teen did the same. Before the older man could react, Izuku broke off into a sprint. He counted the seconds as the man drew closer. 1, 2, Izuku readied his arm. Right as the man closed in, Izuku flinted left. His opponent swerved to join him, just as Izuku had hoped he would. He did a half pirouette at the last moment, shield flung from his hand toward his enemy. The man smirked, dodging his throw by ducking beneath. His words seemed to sizzle as they came out of his mouth. "Is that it?" Izuku stayed silent, not wanting to hurt his slug, as his shield made its way over to the true target. This trusty weapon rebounded off the street pole perfectly, heading towards its water hydrant target like a lover reuniting with their beloved. Or this was supposed to, in theory. Wasn't the trajectory a little too high? His eyes widened in horror. Oh no. The crack was audible. The thud more so. There was more than one gasp in the crowd now. Izuku rushed over to the man's side. Oh no, 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 no. That wasn't supposed to hit there. Did he just kill someone? His hands burned as he rolled the man to his side. The heat from his body seemed to be easing at least. Izuku checked the man's head, wincing as he cast his eyes on the very prominent bump on the back of his head. Izuku really hoped he didn't kill this guy. He wanted to win, of course, but he hadn't gone into the fight to murder someone. That just wasn't his way. Except you did kill people, a dark part of his mind reminded. The plane wasn't empty when you hit the water. Tears formed. He wiped them away with the back of his hand, struggling to keep calm. He needed to check for life signs. Placing his hand beneath the man's nose, he felt a wave of relief as air came out. Still breathing, he checked the man's wrist and the side of his neck just to make sure. Steady heartbeat. Good. Merely unconscious. Or brain dead, his mind supplied helpfully. He rose back onto shaky feet. Strange. He could have sworn he'd heard people around. Oh, the quietness was deafening. Izuku's stomach clenched at the sight of hundreds of people's attention suddenly directed towards him. Wordless, staring on in what Izuku could only describe as shell shock. His heart leaped into his mouth, thumping wildly like a scared rabbit as he tried to regain his composure. Tried. Like many things in Izuku's life, it did not work out. He looked down at the injured man before returning his gaze to the people once more. His cheeks reddened. Without his mask, he felt like an absolute nervous wreck, and probably looked like it too. Here he was, knocking out the people's leader? Boss? None of this made sense. He wasn't sure of anything anymore. His emotions were all over the place, as it was. He struggled to keep from having an anxiety attack, his breathing increasing as more people scrutinized him. Finally, he couldn't take it anymore. "I'm sorry," he yelled, bowing midway several times. "He's alive, I promise. I'm so sorry." And then he ran. Tension grew in his limbs and face as he fled the scene. The police gave chase, but Izuku was faster. His last spurt of adrenaline giving him the boost to evade them. He dodged, swerved, and flipped over obstacles until he no longer heard the shouts of the authorities and the sounds of the crowds. Soon, all he could feel was his body burning, muscles exerting themselves as his feet pounded against the pavement. The fight left him more exhausted than ever before. He hadn't been in this much pain since the day he received the serum. His feet throbbed, likely burned from the fire user's powers. The injuries he sustained would heal, he reasoned, but not for a while. Sirens rang in the distance. Izuku turned into an alleyway. Back streets would give him some sort of reprieve from the chaos around him. Think, 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 he inwardly chanted. Somehow the world around him had drastically changed since he last woke up. There were more quirk users than ever before, more than he had seen in his entire life really. Did all the quirk users from around the world move to Kamino, or did a bunch of non-quirk users awaken as once? Neither theory held much water, but considering what he saw, there wasn't much else to rely on. The cars and buildings had a familiarity to them, but they were changed somewhat too, like slightly newer models than what existed before. He really wished he had some sort of communication link, something to get in contact with his uncle or father or anyone in their group, if they were even in this strange new Kamino. His chest tightened. Blackness etched at the corner of his eyes as his anxiety attack grew. His body slowed, the sprint turning into a jog, then into a walk, then finally leaving him collapsed on the ground. The fuel he'd used earlier now gone, leaving behind his fears and tears. The palms of his hand were bloody and scratched up, stinging as he struggled to move. Get up. His father's stern voice echoed inside his head. Get up and fight. But he was so tired. Every muscle burned and cramped as he tried to get back on his feet. It was useless. He slumped to the ground. His weakened body couldn't go any further. Fighting could wait. He needed to rest. Slowly, he inched toward one of the nearby alley walls. It wasn't his first choice. Lying next to a trash wasn't his idea of a good resting spot. But it was better than sitting out in the open. His body leaned against the structure, head knocking against the hard material. The smell of garbage irritated his nose. His breathing was still harsh, still quick, but he wasn't moving around as much now. Izuku tried to center himself. He looked up, trying to get his bearings straight. What he saw shook him down to his very core. His hands trembled, moving up his arms until the whole body moved. It was an inconspicuous thing, a small poster announcing the opening of a new store. The image faded some by the elements. But that wasn't what got his attention. The date stood out against the background, black numbers outlined in red. He shook his head, disbelief flooding his system. He looked around, trying to find a clue into this being all in his head. A glitch, a hole, something he could use to prove to himself that this was all fake. It had to be. His fingers brushed against paper. He glanced down. The newspaper seemed ordinary until he gave it a closer look. Images of Kirk users covered the front page. The date was different, but it was in the same year as the poster. Izuku released a dry sob, tears prickling in his eyes, realization done in the worst possible way. The future was now. Uncle, father, the members of their Red Tag group. He was all that was left. What felt like just yesterday was now centuries in the past. How? How did this happen? His arms wrapped around his shield, anchoring him as his sobs shook his body. He didn't want to be here anymore. He wanted to go back to his family. He couldn't. He was alone now, truly alone. It scared him. He wanted to hear his uncle's dry laughter. He wanted to see the tired smiles of his compatriots after a long day of work. He wanted. Tears hit the back of his hand as his crying grew louder. He wanted to be saved from this nightmare. He almost didn't hear the footsteps, slowing as they closed in. His shoulders tightened as he cast his gaze upwards, and upwards, and the sun's rays filtered through blonde locks, the rest highlighting the outline of his body. Izuku couldn't help but gape at the sight of blues, yellows, reds, and whites in the figure's costume. He was the epitome of every superhero Izuku read about, distilled it down into its purest form. Awe passed over his features. There was so much warmth in this man's smile. It reminded him of Uncle. "Have no fear," the blond man began, voice carrying through the small alleyway. "It's all right now, because I am." Instinct took over. The moment the shield slipped from his fingers, Izuku immediately regretted his actions. He didn't mean to do that. Sadly, the shot rang true, smacking against the tall man's face before carrying down the alleyway, rolling on its side for several meters before falling on its face in a small puddle of water. Izuku waited for the punch to come. His body sized up, arms at the ready to defend his face and chest. Moments passed. When the hit didn't arrive, Izuku peered through the open gap between his arms. The black star on his shield stared back. His gaze traveled to the holder. Despite the bruise on his cheek, the man continued to smile, as if Izuku hadn't swung his shield at him. "Here," was all he said, pressing the familiar vibranium metal into Izuku's awaiting hands. He lowered himself down to the teen's crumpled form, stretching out his hand.
not too close to make Izuku flinch away, but just enough that it told the boy of his intentions. It was the first time someone had given him the choice since he woke up into this strange new world. That meant something to the teen. It brought another stirring of tears to the teen's eyes. It wasn't out of grief or fear this time, however. He stared down at the offered hand. Taking it meant acknowledging the reality of his situation, that he was no longer in his own time, that the world he grew up in and the people he knew no longer existed. The selfish part of him didn't want that. He wanted to go back to the familiarity, despite its hardships. But he couldn't go back. There was only one path now, despite Izuku's wishes to the contrary. He swallowed back the pile, wiping the rest of his tears away from his forearm. His mind was made up when he first set eyes on the man. He reached out. Warm fingers encompassed his own.